Welcome to the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I'm Deborah Herlax-Enos, a small-town girl turned TV nutritionist and healthy living expert. I design health programs for the average guy or gal, including those average guys named Metallica. On September 1st, 2020, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I asked every oncologist the same question, why did I get cancer? But none of my doctors had good answers for me. I wanted answers, and that's why I started this podcast. I want to help you to lower your cancer risk and provide self-care tips for those in the battle. I'm getting answers, and I want to share them with you. Today's takeaway with Dr. Katie Deming, the conscious oncologist, was surprising, but then also not surprising. So here's what she told me. When she was working as an oncologist, and she would have really nice, overly accommodating women come in, she said in the back of her office, they would all be saying, wow, this woman's going to have it really bad. She's going to have a bad cancer. And she said most of the time it was true. So her conclusion that she drew was that when women don't have good boundaries and, we end up doing things for other people that we end up resenting later, it's really bad for our health. And so that's what I meant by saying it was a surprise, but it also wasn't really a surprise because I felt like I used to be that way too. Listen to today's episode to get all of the scoop from Dr. Katie Deming. Oh, I'm so excited about today's podcast with Dr. Katie Deming. And I listened and watched your TEDx talk. And what I love about your title is that you're the conscious oncologist. The conscious oncologist. So can you unpack that for us? What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here. And, I think that the idea of cancer we've been taught is a physical problem in the physical body. But the more that I dive into this space of holistic healing, I've really gained an understanding that it's so much deeper, right? We have studies that show it's related to emotions. There's data that shows that the mind can affect the genes in our body and what's manifest in our body. And then from a spiritual perspective, I really think that all healing is spiritual and really helping us get reconnected with our authentic self and what we came here to do. And the work that I do with clients now is really bringing all of that together, but in a way that doesn't prioritize the physical. It's like we really need to be looking at this from all aspects. And for me, it's like, I think of conscious as oncologist as being awake to these other aspects of healing is really on all of these different levels if we want to achieve wellness and health.
Okay, so I would imagine that philosophy doesn't go over real well in a big hospital system. You might be called a little woo-woo, which I've been called a little woo-woo too. So maybe we're woo-woo
That's
sisters.
right.
But can you tell me about traditional, Western medicine? I can't imagine that they would consider, spiritual or, maybe early trauma in life impacting health.
Yeah. Well, this is why I left Western medicine in 2022. So I was a radiation oncologist for 20 years and also a healthcare leader. And I ran end to end cancer care for a large healthcare organization. And actually, at the height of my career, I had been nominated to run all of cancer care for that same organization at a national level, where I would have been responsible for prevention, screening, treatment, end to end care, and then into survivorship or end of life for 12 million Americans. So, I was doing all the things. I was very deep in the Western medicine world, and I had an experience that just shifted everything for me, and where I realized I'm not supposed to be here. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And I ended up leaving my career summer of 2022, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing. And this is quite scary just to like say, I don't know, I've trained my whole life for this job and what am I going to do? But I did that and then took a year, a little over a year actually, to do my own exploration and look at what does the science show us about true health and how does that play into the development of disease, including cancer, and look at it from that perspective because all of my training had really been about the disease itself and then taking it like from a like molecular level of like just cancer. But the truth is that cancer occurs in a human being, which is so much more than just the physical machinery of the body. And so I just started looking, and researching and learning about the things that I didn't learn in medicine. And what I learned is there is a lot of data out there to show that emotional trauma can have an impact on disease in the body. Like, so the ACE study, have you ever talked about the ACE study on this podcast
I
before?
I have, but it's been a few months. So why don't you, even just the acronym, can
Sure.
you
So
explain what the
ACE
acronym is?
stands for Adverse Childhood Events. And this was a very large study that was done through Kaiser Permanente and basically looked at children and calculated the number of adverse childhood events, which these are basically traumatic events that can occur in childhood. Could be divorce of a parents. It could be a parent who's incarcerated. It could be a parent who's addicted to drugs or alcohol. It could be physical abuse. It could be sexual abuse. It could be neglect. So they had this whole list of different adverse effects and they gave the children a score and then they tracked these children into adulthood. And what they found was the higher the ACE score, the higher the incidence of cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, lung disease. And this to me was mind blowing because this is a big study. This is not like a tiny little thing. And I had never been taught anything about that. And so then I was approaching it from the opposite end of, radical remissions and looking at Kelly Turner's work, who's a PhD who studies
Mhm.
people who cure cancer without.
Right. She's been a guest
Oh,
on
she
my
has. I love
podcast
that.
before
I
too.
love
Yeah,
that.
she's
Amazing,
amazing.
amazing.
I honestly I quote her all the time.
Yes.
Kelly, Dr. Kelly Turner says.
Yes. So, and what I saw in
Yeah.
there was that there was emotional work that was two of the 9 things that those people do who are able to cure themselves of cancer without treatment are emotional. So one is releasing emotional trauma, and then the other is learning how to cultivate positive emotions. And that's what really set me down on this track. Like, I'm like, I knew it. I knew it had to be more than just the DNA and the physical things that I was taught in medical school. And then as I looked at it, I started understanding epigenetics, how our brain affects the expression of DNA and the health of our cells. And so ultimately this is where I've landed, is in this space of really looking more holistic at healing cancer. And it's definitely different than my old colleagues. So all those people that I used to
Oh, I'll
lead,
bet.
are like, wow, Katie's just really gone out there. But
She's
the thing,
Katie is so out there. But it sounds like you have found an area where you can truly help people discover the root cause of illness. And, our traditional Western medicine, they're great at fixing things. They really are. But to me, it's still a band-aid because if you don't get down to the root cause, why do you have back pain? We can give you an injection, but it's just going to come back if you don't change your posture or you need to exercise or you need a new mattress. And kind of the same thing with cancer. It's there's a good chance it's going to come back in just a different place or, as something else if you don't figure it out.
yeah. Well, there's an analogy or a parable that really brought it home for me when I was, busy in my clinic and working. I happened to go to a meditation retreat with one of my best friends who's a GYN oncologist. So she's a surgeon for gynecologic cancers. And when we were at this meditation retreat, they were telling this parable, and the parable is about the river. And it talks about this village that is alongside a river. And one day they find a body floating in the river, and they basically rescue the person and, get them to dry land. And then the next day there are two people in the river. So they rescue them. And then the next day, four. And every day it's doubling. And so this village gets very organized, and they've got rescue boats, and they've got pulleys to get all the people off the river. And the village elders are praising them for such a good job and how well they're rescuing all the people. And I turned to my friend and I said, this is Western medicine. This is Western oncology. We are pulling people out of the river, but what the heck is going on upstream? And
Oh, that's so good.
when
Yeah.
I got people onto dry land, we treated their cancer. I felt like I was doing them a disservice to let them go back to the lifestyle that created the cancer in the first place. And we're telling people, every day I was telling people, I don't know why you got cancer. Like, let's just take breast cancer as an example. Only 5 to 10% of breast cancers is genetically related. And there's very few demonstrable events that are related to environmental exposure. So most of the time I was saying, I don't know, it's bad luck. And that to me just felt so wrong. How could we not know?
Yeah.
How could we not know what's causing it? And so this is what, really led me into this space of like, I want to go upstream. And then I also want to help people once they've had cancer. How do you really get well? How do you support your body so that it doesn't
and
create
stay well?
Yes.
Right. Well, in my experience is similar. When I, as I mentioned to you earlier, I was asking every oncologist, why did I get cancer? Hence the name of this podcast. And the answer I got was, well, you have boobs. And I thought, well, so does 50% of the rest of the people on this planet. So are you saying if you have breasts, like it's inevitable? And I just couldn't accept that answer.
I hear you. I'm with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you are. You're my
Yeah.
people. I just met you, but you're already my people. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about. We talked about the root cause, and you feel that genetics doesn't have to be the main driver.
It's not.
Because I had very little genetics. So let's go back to that root cause. Could it be things in your childhood that you haven't processed?
Well, we have studies that show children who have higher number of traumas, emotional traumas, have a higher incidence of cancer. So to me, we have data that is showing there's a correlation between those two things. So absolutely. And then as I started, I had tuned into this before I left Western medicine because I was particularly good at caring for patients with trauma. I just happened to be, the one that if my front desk was scheduling people, they would say, oh, if this patient is, challenging and they've got like other emotional issues that are going on, they would just schedule them with me. And so I really noticed that there was this correlation between childhood trauma and people with cancer. And so I had already noticed that. And then that same G1 oncologist who was at that meditation retreat with me, when I started mentioning this to her, she started asking all of her patients, and not only childhood
Oh my
traumas, but
gosh.
stressful events. And both of us started charting this, and we were noticing all of our patients have some kind of, and the thing is that you could say, well, everyone has trauma living in today's world. There's just like a, world full of trauma, but there was definitely something that we were seeing. And then, as I'm looking, when I started looking at, other research and people are doing things, I started really looking at the out there stuff. So like German New Medicine is an example of that, where have you ever heard of that? Yeah,
No,
so this
no.
was founded by Dr. Hammer, and it's quite controversial in the cancer space. And it's not something that I like advocate in terms of the treatment, but basically, Dr. Hammer, his son was shot and killed like unexpectedly as a teenager. And within a few months, he developed testicular cancer. And he
Hmm.
was a doctor, he was an internist. And so he started noticing, wow, I think there's a connection between traumatic events and development of cancer, and has basically developed this whole framework about explaining that disease in the body correlates to traumatic events, like sudden traumatic events. And,
Hmm.
basically demonstrated that there were findings on CT scans in the brain in certain areas, depending on the kind of trauma. And basically, just becoming aware of the trauma can help start to heal the body. And in cancer, it's quite controversial because he now is deceased, and, other people are carrying on that work. But recommended no treatment for cancer, like, whatsoever. And so I
Hmm.
feel like it's very kind of fringe out there. But this is the type of stuff where when I became open, I just was like, I want to just see what everything that's out there. And you start to see there are other
Right.
people who are putting these pieces together. And
Mhm. And really connecting the dots, it sounds
mhm.
like. Some dots that maybe people don't wanna connect, which leads me to a tough question for you. Um, do we have to be aware of the trauma from childhood or, sometimes things happen to us when we're so young, we maybe don't have conscious memories of it, and, how does I guess this is a two-part question, and then how does somebody go about unpacking and healing from
Yeah.
trauma?
Well, this is a good question because, traditionally in like Western society, we use therapy. So, like, that's the most common way that people think of managing through trauma. But
Mhm.
sometimes that can be traumatic itself, like going through and digging up those things. And like you said, sometimes people have suppressed memories of trauma. And so, in my practice, we use a technique called Psych K. It's called psychological
Mhm.
kinesis. And what it does is that it helps teach people how to process their emotions by bringing both sides of the brain online. And so that's one component of it. But the other piece is not going back and like rehashing traumas, but using the subconscious mind to help release and then program in more helpful stories. And there are actually quite
Hmm.
a few different techniques that you can use that are not like traditional therapy, that are going to dig up and bring people back into that can help heal things on a subconscious level. And this is whether someone has conscious
Hmm.
memory of it or not. All of these traumatic events get stored in our subconscious. And then basically, our subconscious runs 95% of our thoughts and 95% of our behavior. And so, even if consciously we know we want, let's just say we know we want good health, our conscious mind is like,
Mhm.
we're doing the things for good health. But if in your subconscious mind, you have some devaluing story or some emotional trauma that
Mhm.
is creating a pattern that is not geared towards creating that, then basically what you're doing is you're subconsciously creating that. And 95% of your thoughts are created by your subconscious. And this is why people can know the
Hmm.
right thing to do, but then have patterns come up that are repetitive, that are actually not helpful for them. And they're coming from the subconscious.
Okay. Hmm. So there's a way to not have to rehash
Absolutely.
trauma to
Absolutely.
to get rid of it. Okay, that is really good news because I mean, we've all had trauma
Yeah.
as you mentioned. And even just watching the news today is is trauma. So Dr. Deming, it sounds like what you're saying is we don't necessarily have to go back and relive all that trauma to process it. Is that
Yeah,
true?
that is accurate. And there are actually, I
Okay.
explained that Psyche is one method that I'm using currently, but there are others. So you can use hypnosis as one way. There's
Mm.
emotion
Mhm.
code. There's EFT tapping. There are multiple
Mhm.
modalities that can be used to help release trauma without having to go back into it.
Okay, because I mean, we've all had trauma. Even just watching the news today feels like trauma. But I have quite a few girlfriends who've been through some pretty traumatic experiences when they were younger. And I I I think that maybe they don't know because I didn't know that you don't have to relive it to process it. So that, I think, is really encouraging news for people.
Absolutely.
Okay, if you've been around for any length of time, you know I'm not a fan of EMFs, electromagnetic fields, or frequencies, but I'm a fan of my cell phone. Yes, I use my cell phone way too much. I'm on my iPad way too much. So here's what I'm doing is I'm learning to manage technology because I want to be a really healthy person. I don't want to be around excess radiation. And this is why I'm a big fan of WaveBlock. And one of the things I love about WaveBlock is they're educators. They're educating people on how to take protective measures to still use technology, but just protect their bodies and their children. I didn't realize this. I was on a WaveBlock phone call the other day, and they were telling me that children or kids, the small ones, their skulls absorb 10 times the radiation that an adult fully formed skull will absorb. And that in other countries, like European countries, and I can't remember all of them, but they actually ban Wi-Fi in nurseries and kindergartens. So what a great idea, because the kids' skulls are just not fully formed yet. Okay, so here is what I do to protect myself. First of all, I turn my Wi-Fi router off at night. If you go to the WaveBlock website, which is waveblock.com, they have a whole educational section, and the top EMF emitting devices, cell phones, earbuds, or things like that, and Wi-Fi routers. So I'm trying to manage those. One of the ways I manage the radiation on my listening device is I use the WaveBlock tape that goes around the device. It doesn't impact me hearing at all. And what it does, according to the research by WaveBlock, it knocks radiation down by 90+%. So if you have a listening device on each ear, where do you think that modem is meeting? The modem is your head. So you want to knock down radiation as much as you possibly can. So go check out WaveBlock. Again, I really encourage you to read some of their education. And if you use the code ENOS10, you'll get 10% off of your purchase. And do your own due diligence, but it's a fascinating topic. Educate yourself, protect your kids, enjoy. And so it sounds like this is not just your theory. There is good research discussing and finding that childhood or trauma throughout life can contribute to cancer risk or heart disease or diabetes.
Absolutely. Many types of illness. Cancer is just my particular lens, but as I'm digging into this research, I'm finding that it's correlated with other types of illness as well.
Wow. Okay. So where does someone start if they want to live their healthiest lives, no matter what age they are, and whether or not they've ever been diagnosed with something? Where does somebody start just to make sure this area of their life is cleaned up?
Well, I think from the emotional standpoint, the things that I like to teach people, and both from the preventive standpoint, this is my goal is to get upriver, right? And to help people before they
Right.
become sick is like emotional fluency. So we are emotional beings. We are intended to experience emotions because there's information that is conveyed through emotions. Emotions tell us when we're in danger or when we're loved. We can feel that. And so we don't want to suppress emotions. We want to learn how to process them. And so learning how to process emotions in a healthy way so that they can run through you and they don't get stuck or they don't get suppressed is like the first thing. So I'd say teaching people how to process emotions is one of the first things that I do. And then the second thing is, doing some subconscious work, because our subconscious mind, and Bruce Lipton is a great person to read about who talks about this. Bruce Lipton is a cell biologist who studies epigenetics. And he was basically studying, looking at cells and determining how they grew. And what he noticed was it depended on the culture that he was growing the cells in. And then ultimately that led him to his book, Biology of Belief is one of his most popular books. And it talks about how in the human, the environment of our cells, our brain and our mind plays a very important role. And so the expression of our genes can be affected by our mind. And so, anyway, the subconscious mind, he explains in the book that the subconscious mind is programmed in the first 8 years of life. And so, if you experience
Okay.
things in your first 8 years of life, that's that 95% of the brain is subconscious. And basically, you're going to run
Hmm.
those patterns. And the subconscious mind doesn't know good from bad, it just takes everything as fact. So, everything that's said to you, if you were told you were stupid and you're ugly and you're fat and you're this and
Mhm.
you're that, your subconscious mind just pulls that in and is like, okay, that's who we are. And basically then we replay
Mm.
that tape for the rest of our lives in the subconscious. And so I think subconscious work is really powerful. So you can access that through like I said, hypnosis or psyche or emotion code or EFT tapping. But these are some of the ways that you can access and release those programming that's been put into your subconscious that you may not even be aware of.
Hmm. So this sounds like this is actually probably the first place people should start. I mean, you can eat a healthy diet. I mean, this was me. Ran half marathons, did hot yoga, ate organic, non-GMO, the picture of health, and yet I still got sick. So you can't out eat or out exercise or out supplement early childhood trauma, it sounds like.
Yeah. And this is like quite common in my
Wow.
practice. I had so many patients who were really healthy and eating like a raw vegan diet or marathoners or whatever. And they're like, I'm taking care of my body. But the other thing that's really interesting, and I think this is an observation. I don't have evidence to say this, but in breast cancer specifically, because that was my specialty. I specialized in breast and gynecologic cancers when I was in as a radiation oncologist. And a lot of the women who had breast cancer were the overdoers, the ones who were in.
Mm,
And so I think there's something about the emotions and the way that we do the things that we do. Are we doing them out of a not good
mm,
enough, out of suppressing our own needs to take care of others, to, you know,
mhm,
there was this real caregiver, the women that I saw, they were doing all the right things, but then they were doing it out of like obligation for caring for everyone else and
mm,
not really paying attention to their own needs and setting boundaries to say, this is what I need for my own well being. They were really focused on everyone else. And this is like
mhm,
this is kind of, I don't know what to describe it as, but in medicine or in oncology, we used to always say, oh, if they're super nice, it's going to be bad. And I just remember there was this
Wow.
one patient that I had, and she was in her 40s. She was like the sweetest, and she just demonstrates this principle. So this is why I'm sharing the story. Sweetest person, like everyone when she came in the clinic, they were like, she is just like the sweetest person I've ever met. And her cancer, like you could blow on it and it would spread. And her cancer was so aggressive and spread so fast. And she
Wow.
succumbed to her cancer. But that's an example of like, we see this and the doctors talk about it. The nurses and everyone
Hmm.
will be like, yeah, if they're super nice and super like do everything for everyone else, they're going to have it bad. And this is like one of those things that we say, but then nobody really
Wow.
like thinks about, well, wait, why is that?
Right.
Like, what's going on there? And I think it's a
That
suppression.
is crazy. I've never heard that. So in your experience that, as you said, the nicer they were, the more aggressive or the worse the cancer
And
was.
now that I'm understanding emotions, I think it's really about
Mhm.
suppression of their own emotional needs. And they're holding this vibration,
Mm.
whether it's guilt or whether it's shame, that basically we're vibratory beings. If look at things from a quantum level, everything is vibrating and emotions
Mhm.
hold frequency. And so when we're suppressing our own needs, oftentimes it's out of guilt or shame. And also, like you think about trauma, people have guilt or shame, around trauma, that I think it's what we're holding, this vibration that we're holding in our cells and in the water of our cells that ultimately impacts the function of those cells and the development of disease in the body.
Okay. Boy, this is a lot for me to get my head around, but I'm really glad we're talking about it because people, especially women, I think need to hear this. I don't know, I've never had a lot of men in my life who over gave, were overgivers, and put, like women. I mean, I will just say women that, I mean, I feel like that's one of the ways we serve our families and humanity is that we don't put our oxygen mask on first. We take care of everybody else and then we put our oxygen mask first. And I would say men put the oxygen mask on first and then they'll help everybody else. And so it sounds like that's a healthier way to go.
Yeah. And also, this is
Like,
conditioning. So, this is the
it is
programming of our
conditioning.
subconscious mind. In our
Mhm.
society, women are conditioned to be caregivers and to put
That's true.
their needs aside to make sure everyone else is taken care of. And this is like, even when we know we're like, I should be getting my needs met. But then the like programming is
Mhm.
like, has us doing these things. And ultimately, if we don't set healthy boundaries and we're living our lives to care for everyone else, that's affecting us
Mhm.
on a cellular level.
It is. It is. And I remember this was years ago when I'd first gotten married and I moved to Washington State from my home in Northern California. And I was just trying to get involved with lots of people and create a community and get involved with a new church. And when people asked me to do things, I did it because I wanted to meet people and I wanted to, just get established. And I had a new girlfriend say, if you resent doing it, it's not a blessing to anybody, including yourself. And I thought, oh, bingo. Like I'm over giving and not taking care of my own needs. And then you just get resentful, like, oh, I've got to drive over there and do this. Now I have to go do this. And you just end up getting resentful about the time you're giving. I say that in quotation marks to others because it's no longer a gift.
Yeah. No, I love that she said that because it's so true. But
Yeah.
there are all these expectations. So we feel like we need to do that.
Mhm.
And actually, that's some of the work that I've been working on since I left Western medicine in 2022 is really learning how to set boundaries for what's best for me. Because I mean, as an oncologist, I know people think like oncologists are, short and, can maybe like have some negative things about the doctors per se, but the truth is that we are definitely overgivers, and I was way
Mhm.
overdoing so many things and realized that if I wanted to model that for my patients and teach people how to truly take care of themselves, I had to learn how to do it for myself, and it was kind of painful.
Right. I'll bet it was. And it's not easy to learn new things. But then, there's encouragement along the way, of course, because maybe you're sleeping better and you feel better and you have more time to go do that yoga class. And then all of a sudden, you just become such a blessing to other people because you've taken care of yourself first.
Yeah, and I'll take that one step further as to say what got you here, which is cancer, is not going to get you where you want to go, which is well being. And that change is really required to create something different. And what you just
Mhm.
described is the practice of creating something different, creating that change.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. So, Dr. Deming, you've unpacked a lot for us today. But now I want to end with action plan and hope and I don't like saying, "Do you have a three-step program?" because that's not what this is about. But where is a good place to start? Do you have some resources that you can share with my listeners?
Yeah, so I have a podcast called Born to Heal, and that gives little snippets of like actionable things like 15-minute episodes of like how to process emotions, how to manage fear, which is a big one when people have cancer.
Mhm.
So my podcast is a great place to start. And then in the new year, I am going to be having some workshops around kind of pulling this all together. How do you create a plan around creating true well-being in your body?
Okay. Okay. And then do you also have some resources? You'd mentioned tapping, which I love. I love tapping. And maybe I can include some things in the show notes for somebody to just kind of, see what else is out there once they start deciding to maybe just take a look at this work.
Yeah, so I don't use tapping in my programs right now, but Psych K, so Psych K it stands for psychological kinesis. And that's actually a technique that Bruce Lipton, who I described, that cell biologist, recommends. That's something that you can look up, and they have providers kind of worldwide who do this. And it's a way to help learn emotional processing as well as programming of the subconscious mind. So that would be a great place to start.
Mm, that sounds really good. Okay. Okay, so this is how I like to end my podcast is what advice would you give me? Something I can do today to never get cancer again?
I would say understanding that there is a connection between every thought that you have and the emotions that you experience and the physical health of your body, and just starting to become aware of what thoughts are you thinking, what emotions are you feeling, and are those supporting peace, because peace is the
Mm,
place where our body heals. And so finding a place of peace in whatever way you can, whether that's meditation, whether that's doing, just noticing your emotions and letting them go, that's where I would start, is just becoming aware that, like, this is like a very integrated being that
mm.
you're in, and that it all plays together.
Oh, I love that. And I will admit for the before cancer, if I was mad at somebody or somebody said something to me or somebody, cut me off in traffic, I might get into bed and just kind of chew and stew about it. And then I'd go to sleep and I'd have all these negative emotions in my head, in my body. And even last night, my husband and I were both tired. We're trying to decorate the Christmas tree. We both just got a little snappy at each other. And I went to bed and I thought, that husband. And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to get up and I'm going to reset. So I got up, walked around my house, did a little bit of stretching, did a little breathing, did a little praying, and I went to bed happy. And that is a big change for me because before cancer, I just would have churned and burned. And I decided to just change my circumstances because I'm the only one who has power to do that.
Absolutely. Well, and that's one of the things that
Yeah.
I teach my clients, is how to reframe things to find appreciation for what you have. It's like beautiful that you have a husband and that you have a home that you
Hmm.
can decorate for Christmas, and starting to
Yes.
settle into, okay, I was like upset, but you know what? It's like, it could be that I didn't have anyone to fight with. So it's like finding those reframes. And I love that
Right.
you knew enough to get
Uh,
up and walk around and kind of recenter yourself. But it is really important to reframe things that way. And when you notice
mhm.
yourself getting upset, just realizing that ultimately, whether you're upset or not, doesn't necessarily impact them. It impacts you more than it does anyone else.
It does. It does. Ah, Dr. Deming, this was the podcast I wish I would have had 10 years ago. So thank you. It's never too late to learn new things. It doesn't matter how old you are. It's never too late. It doesn't matter how sick you are. You can still learn new things that can make incredible changes. So thank you for sharing your wisdom on the podcast today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Okay, I don't know what the weather's like where you are, but I am telling you, it is getting cold here in Washington. I feel like we're going to have an early winter, and I think it's actually happening. So I hope I didn't prophesy that. But anyway, as winter starts to happen, I transition from eating salads and raw foods to eating more savory, warm and savory and salty and all the things kinds of food because I get cold in the winter like a lot of you, and eating warmer foods feels like it just fuels my energy and makes me feel better. So this is how I'm transitioning. Instead of salads, I'm now doing more veggie bowls. So I often will take ground beef. It's easy to keep in your freezer, defrost fairly quickly, and then I'll cook it up. I'll put rice on the bottom of the bowl. I'll have a lot of roasted vegetables on top of that, and then a little bit of the ground beef on top. Little drizzle of olive oil or vinegar and oil, and you have got yourself the most fabulous meal. If you want to get fancy, crumble a little feta cheese and maybe chop some parsley on top. Your stomach will thank you. And my friends at ButcherBox are making this really easy for you to do by offering my community $30 off of your first box. I'm just going to stop right there and tell you they're not doing that for anybody else. Go ahead and do an online search. You're going to realize they're so good to me. So you get $30 off of your first box. And then bonus, you get free choose your own protein in every box for up to a year. And so the choose your own protein, you get a choice of wild Alaskan salmon. Honestly, who doesn't love that? Lots of recipes on my blog if you want to see how I cook it. The grass-fed, grass-finished ground beef, or chicken breast, which I make a lot of chicken noodle soup in the winter, and then I just freeze it in single serving sizes. And it's just a great, super easy dinner that I just have to defrost. So go to butcherbox.com/Enos, use the code Enos, get this great deal. So hope you enjoy this special. Thank you for joining me today on the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I've got my shopping guide for all of my cancer self-care items in the show notes, along with information about today's guest and our show sponsors. And don't forget to subscribe to my podcast so you never miss an episode. Keep in mind, I'm not a doctor. I'm just a gal that got diagnosed with cancer and wanted answers. If you need medical advice, please be sure to consult with a medical professional. And thank you for listening.